Hello, everybody. It's Matt Stevens here for another We Love Cycling video podcast. It's a Tour de France special again, and this guest is also very special indeed. It's none other than Stephen Roche, who, of course, won the triple back in 1987. And by the triple, I mean the Giro d'Italia, the Tour de France, and the World Road Race Championships. Only two people in history have done that, and that's Stephen Roche and Eddy Merckx. And this is a wonderful deep dive into Stephen's relationship with the Tour de France, the fact that the first time he came across the race was when he rode it for the very first time way back in 1983. And one of the most interesting things about this conversation is the fact that it took somebody else to point out the significance of his win in 1987 in the Tour de France for him to put it into proper context. You'll enjoy this one. Stephen Roche, going to be honest with you, mate. I know you pretty well, but you were one of the people and one of the riders that inspired me to pursue a career in bike racing. And I wasn't a mega rider, but here I am still 30, 40 years later. You're on the end of a call, and we're here to talk about the Tour de France. But firstly, thank you very much for joining me, mate.
You're welcome, Matt. It's always great to be involved with you, because I appreciate your shows and your podcasts and your whatever you call them, your little broadcasting, let's say, with different writers. A lot of humor, and I know you're as passionate as I am, and it's great to have people like yourself kind of broadcasting to a wide generation and a wide kind of population, because not everybody is a cycling fan, but they're a cycling enthusiast maybe, and they get a lot out of your show. So thank you, Matt, for your contribution to our sport.
No, it's very kind, very kind. Well, I'm in my spare room. You're in your garden. It looks like you're somewhere very, very exotic. But what we're here to talk about is the Tour de France. You know, it's just around the corner. I've just come off commentary for the Dauphiné, of course, the big race, one of the big races that leads into it. But what I want to talk to you a little bit about, Stephen, if you don't mind, is we know what you've achieved in the race, and you've left a quite incredible mark on our sport with your Triple Crown back in 1987. But can you take us back, if you can? I know you've got a pretty decent memory. Can you remember when you first became aware of the Tour de France and how that came to be, and then a little bit about your journey to ultimately winning it? But when did you first become aware of the Tour?
Well, I started cycling when I was about 13, 14. And of course, when you start cycling, you hear all these big things, and big names of riders. We heard about the Coppi, Bartali, Gimondi, and in like the late 70s, we were speaking like about the great Eddy Merckx, and then we started talking about the legendary Sean Kelly.
Yes,
and being from Ireland, and we were all ears about what Sean Kelly is doing on the continent. This young guy, bricklayer from Carrick-on-Shore, going over to the continent, leading out the great Freddie Martins, and even winning a stage in the Tour de France. And that's probably where I became more aware of it, that it's actually something that it's open, which basically it's not open to just kind of Belgians or French or Italians or Dutch. It's also open to ourselves, like one of our own has just gone over and won a stage and being one of Freddie Martin's best lead-out men. So possibly then I became aware that the Tour de France, or there was cycling outside of Ireland, to speak, because I was very much like in my own community. I was in school riding my bike, but with my friends, but not really interested in what was going on in the rest of the world. Not interested because I wasn't curious, but because there was no documentation or information about the outside world of cycling. There was, we finally, after a lot of work, I got my local news agency to bring in one Cycling Weekly. And that was every week I used to go get my Cycling Weekly, and then there was two, then there was other magazines, but that was probably the earliest. Probably would have been 75, 76, where I would have been more or less introduced to that there was cycling outside of Ireland.
And what about your first kind of taste of the Tour? When did you ever go and watch it before you actually raced it? Did you ever see the Tour de France as a young rider, or was it literally you never saw it and then you ended up racing it, but early in your career with Peugeot? How at what point was your first, interaction with the race itself?
My first interaction was when I on the start line in '83.
Oh, right. So literally,
Yeah,
you knew about it, you read about it, and then you were there as a professional rider.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
I was went as an amateur in 1980, and during the tour I was away for the Olympics. And I came back, I went pro in '81, and I was too young to ride the tour that year, so I watched it on television, of course, but didn't even go and see it. And then '82 is similar, and then '83, then I was on the Peugeot team for it, and arrived at the start line. I said, "Wow, what have we got here?" You know, you arrive 3 days before, and everything starts building up. We have the medical test at the time. There was the doctors were there. They would see each rider individually, give them a quick brush over as to our medical history, and make sure we're apt for competing.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's a team presentation, even though it was only very, very small and, very discreet at the time, there was a team presentation. And then, of course, you get about a suitcase with like 10 new jerseys, 20 pair of socks, 10 new pair of shorts, and this lovely road book of where you're going for the next 3 weeks. So, but for me, it was amazing because I was like 23 years of age. At this stage, I'm living 3 years in France, so I've kind of know a lot more about the international cycling and who the Hinos were.
Sure.
Van Impe, the Joop Zoetemelk, the Henny Kuipers. Like I was a little bit more aware of who these guys were and how these guys were performing in the big races.
And so, when did you know you'd been selected to ride the Tour? How was the competition? Because the team you were with, Peugeot, had it was a very, very strong team at that particular time, wasn't it? And your compatriots would have been the likes of Sean Yates. Was Alan Piper then? Robert Miller, Phil Anderson, to name just the British riders, in the team. So when did you know you were going to ride?
Well, I had a very good Tour of Romandy in May. I won the Tour of Romandy, beating Phil Anderson. So I was having a reasonably good season. And so Pascal Simon was more or less the leader of the team at the time. So I was brought into the team to help like the likes of Pascal Simon and to a learning curve for myself.
Sure.
So no real pressure. So if you remember, Pascal Simon did an incredible ride on the mountain stage, got the jersey, and basically, wiped everybody out. So we had a great team meeting then that now Simon's our man. We still have a few kind of mountain stages to come, but there was transition stage or two before the next big mountain stage. Just keep everybody safe. But unfortunately for Pascal, the very next day we were riding along a road, just talking, as they call it, transition stage, and Pascal hit a wheel and went off the road into the ditch and broke his collarbone or shoulder blade. But we didn't know what actually he had broken or not broken or injured or whatever. But they decided to strap him up and send him on his way. So he finished the stage, and the doctor saw him, got x-rays, and I think the shoulder wasn't broken, or they weren't telling us it was broken, because at that time, Peugeot were, of course, taking in all the promotion they could get, and the page one of the newspapers, all the televisions were all talking about Pascal, this Peugeot rider, Pascal Simon, riding the Tour de France and having the yellow jersey and being maybe the next French winner and everything else. So they're more interested in that. And there was like 2 days of transition where they said, okay, well, it doesn't matter. Even one leg, he can do the next 2 days.
Different times.
Yeah, we never know what happens. He might come around before the next mountain stage. So we were all basically told to just stay around Pascal and make sure he stays comfortable, he gets enough kind of rest, no issues, and make sure he gets to the end of each stage. And we'll see what happens in the mountains. So every day they patched him up with tape on his back and pulled him back and made sure they really rebuild him every day. and put him on his bike, and we finished every stage. There was the 3 stages of transition, and we succeeded in getting him to the finish every day. Then we came to the mountains, and we kind of had our doubts, but we knew that the truth was going to come out, because the real truth was, if it's broken, there's no way you can climb. Is this kind of a bluff? So the others go attack him. So we were kind of like, with the doctor and the management, they had one thing, and we were just told to do what we had to do.
Wow. Okay.
But we still had doubts ourselves. Okay, this guy, how can they keep the guy in here if it's broken? Maybe it's strategy to dissuade the other guys from attacking in the transition stages. So we didn't know really. But anyway, once we hit the mountains, we found out that it was actually real, that it was actually, much more serious than we had thought. And Pascal had to abandon. So we were more or less given then a free card. And I always remember then the stage into Morzine, I think it was my first stage where I really found I could climb. And we were with Robert Miller, and Rob was riding in front of me. There was one guy ahead, I think, in the breakaway, and they were going up over the Jupiland before dropping down into Morzine. And I did road tempo with Robert, and I realized, gee, I can do this, And just watching Robert like click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, no fast accelerations, nothing. Everything was so smooth.
Sure.
So I kept with Robert and hung on to him. I got over the top, and then we down the far side. I think I was second on the stage. Robert was third, but nevertheless, the first time that I ever actually climbed at that level, and I next day was Alpe d'Huez, I think, and I rode quite well as well. Although I was, got dropped towards the end, but nevertheless, the first time I really kind of embraced the mountains and realized that there was in the past I was getting over climbs, where here I'm getting over the calls.
Yeah.
So it was the first time I really realized that I can get over these things with the best of them.
Did you, at that point, although you were a rider that quickly was making his way through the ranks, did you even dare to believe at that point that you could win the Tour, or did you think, I could be competitive in the next few years? What did you allow yourself to believe? Because you've become a great champion, but at what point did your relationship with the Tour become one that you believed that you could win? When did that happen? Over what period? Because it was only a few years later that you did it.
Well, I think one of my biggest advantages and one of my biggest downfalls is my positivity.
Okay.
And I always looked at a race as an event won. I never said the Tour de France or the Grand Prix of Lille or the Criterium and whatever in Sheffield. I didn't really differentiate between one and the other. They were races to be won. I'm a professional cyclist. I'm being paid to win races, and a win was a win. And without being, standing pretentious, that was my way of looking at things. And I didn't really, I always say we're all equal. The guys that are riding faster than me or that are ahead of me, they're there to be beaten. So I got to go out and beat them. And that's the way I kind of looked at it. And nothing was too big, and nothing was ever too small. And my competitors were all equal, and I was equal to them as well. And on a good day, I can beat them. So without being or sounding pretentious, like I am, I always looked at the race as a Tour de France being another race, even though it's a monument, as something I could win. Even though it might sound a bit ridiculous, I always felt that it was just another race.
Sure. So essentially, you simplified it, didn't you, in your mind as just another race? That's quite a. I've never really heard you say that before. It's really, really interesting. But still, although you had that in your mind, you must have looked at the Tour and realized how important, how significant the race is, because the Tour's the Tour, isn't it? I mean, every race has its own identity, but, anybody on the street who knows a little bit about cycling has heard of the Tour above everything else. So you must have, how did you separate that? Because that's really interesting. Surely the Tour must have seemed to be something almost insurmountable for you, or did you just stick to that? Okay, it's just another race.
Well, two things. When I was 19, I won the Tour of Ireland, and to this day, I'm still the youngest rider to have won the Tour of Ireland, the Ross. And when I won it, the last day after the final time trial, there's a television footage of me lying on my bed with my yellow jersey on me, being interviewed by Michael O'Carroll. And Michael O'Carroll was saying to me, Stephen, well, 19 now, you've won this Tour of Ireland, you've won it in, great style, you won 2 or 3 stages, you won the final time trial. What does this mean to you? What people say, you've done well. And so, well, I'm 19 now. And so, well, yeah, I just won the Tour of Ireland, 19 years of age. People say that I'm strong and I'm good and everything else, but I just want to leave a mark in cycling. So so here I am saying, I just want to leave a mark in cycling. So looking back at it now, I'm saying, well, wasn't I lucky? I did leave my mark, because otherwise I'd been seen as being really, really, but just like 19 years of age, and I'm saying I want to leave my mark on cycling. I've only won the Tour of Ireland, But at the same time, then I went along then and I finished third in the Tour in '85, and I won it in '87, and a long history of the Tour. But I never really realized, believe it or not, how important the Tour was, or my victory was, until probably 30 years later.
Wow.
30 years later, I'm at on the Tour de France, and I'm working for Skoda. We have our guests at night time. We have Simon Dumoulin putting up a PowerPoint presentation to our guests to show them what the Tour de France is all about, and introducing his the Skoda VIPs or legends to the guests. And Simon put up this big screen, and he introduced Tim Howers, ex-British champion, one or two other guys, and he said in our last guest, there's you've got to be screen, and he splits it up into 103 different squares, photographs. He says, of the Tour de France, 103 years, there's been so many winners, and there's so many winners, over 100 and different winners over the last 103 years. But of those 103, so many of them have, won it twice or whatever. And there's something that the screen goes. Then of these so many riders, there was some of them have won the Tour and the Giro. Then again, they said, well, and of those so few, only 2 of them have won the triple. And it comes down to myself and Eddie Merckx. The guys, well, one was Eddie Merckx and one was Stephen Roach, your host for the evening. And really at that time, even though we're talking about Giro, Tour and World, like, okay, but nevertheless, for the first time I realized how important that achievement was, but also how important the Tour was in everybody else's lives, because we all hear about Laurent Jalabert, we all hear about the great King Sean Kelly, and we hear about all these great guys, and they've got incredible careers. And when you speak in public about them, people will say, "Oh, well, Sean never won the Tour." Even though he won the Tour of Spain and all the classics and all the state races to be won. Same as Laurent Jalabert. He won all the classics, he won the Tour of Spain, many stages and all the different World Tour tours, but has never won the Tour de France. So for 30 years, I never really kind of gave him much thought. I'm a Tour de France winner. Okay, brilliant. But I never really realized how important the impact had been on in cycling, until Simon actually put us up on a board and started whittling down the number of people that actually won the Tour, and how rare there was 19 Tour de France winners still alive, still around, So it was amazing. So I kind of said, yeah, okay, I'm happy to be here.
It's amazing when you put it like that, isn't it? Because I guess it takes somebody else sometimes to try and put things into perspective for you. But when you explain it like that, and the triple especially, I mean, I know that most conversations with you, Stephen, and I'm sure, I hope you don't get fed up with it, because people want to talk about that triple a bit. I mean, it is monumental. It's just you and Merckx that have done it. I mean, I guess Tadej Pogacar now has done one step, but it's two big steps, isn't it? To do the Tour and then to do the Worlds. I think he's the type of rider that can do it. But you really have left your mark on history. And can you just actually share with us one of your most memorable days at the Tour de France, whether it was 1987, whether it was 1985, or is there a day that really stands out that you can share with us on any given tour that has stuck with you for any particular reason?
Well, there are, different days for different reasons.
Yeah.
But I suppose the one that most people will talk about and the one that's more vivid in my memory is the stage de La Plagne, where I, let's say, could have lost my tour.
Yeah.
Tactically and physically, it was touch and go. And, but, it's, 37 years on, we still talk about the way the whole thing went, the way I was chasing Delgado towards the end, and I managed to stay cool and let him think he was winning, come back towards the end, but only because I'd been away on a break before, but people don't know that, So, like, even though I lived the whole stage, I remember exactly, why things unfolded the way they did and everything else, which, people may not know it, but I look at myself and say, well, that was a masterpiece, And,
yeah.
Even, people without knowing what happened from the start of the stage still look at the end result and say, wow, that was amazing stuff, But that stage probably, stands out in my mind and my memory for many, many reasons. But, basically because of the strategy, because of the effort I put in, and how cool I stayed going up the hill, watching Delgado right away from me, knowing in my own mind that, okay, I've got one shot here. I cannot make a mistake. So I got to go and come back to him as late as I can, but I want to get as close to him before the finish. And yet I stayed cool, and also attacking like 100K to go. That was crazy. But nevertheless, Delgado was isolated, a stall opportunity. I took it. It backfired. Then I got a second opportunity, but I couldn't make a mistake. So, it was for me, it's an amazing stage. But on the other hand, contrasting was it was 83, 84, maybe 85, maybe 84, maybe 83. I was riding 83 actually was, yeah. After Pascal Simon had abandoned, I did my great performance with Robert Miller into Morzine. 2 or 3 days later, I'm riding with over the Col de Glandon, Galibier-Glandon, down up over Alpe d'Huez. And all of a sudden, I'm riding the Glandon. To my right, I have Lucien Van Impe.
Yep.
To my left, I have Johan van der Velde. In front of me, I have other guys. And I said, wow, I'm in good company here. I'm in good company here, So I said, should I really be here, This is not my world, Coming from Dublin, winning the Tour of Ireland, okay, but this is not my world, But at the same time, I'm so impressed, I don't eat. So we get to the top of the Col de Glandon, and I can see it as it was yesterday. About 2K from the top, there's a couple of S-bends, and one very, very sharp kind of U-turn on the left with a very high stone wall. And I remember kind of getting shot, boom, hitting the wall.
Yeah.
And they say, just before this corner, and I went around the corner, like literally touching the wall. Oof, what's happening here, And I'd blown my brains. And then a guy called Marcel Tinazzi, who's the next rider of that generation, was coming up behind me. Steve, what's up? So he gave me some sugar drinks. I drank them down. And I got over the top with him. We drove down the descent like he was crazy on descending. Hung on to him going down the descent, got down to the valley, rode to get in the valley, back onto the back of the front group before the foot of Alpe d'Huez. And on the foot of Alpe d'Huez, I hear the race motorbike coming up the side of it. I can hear the race radio, and they're saying that the green jersey of Sean Kelly is pointed out at 11 minutes or 12 minutes behind.
Okay.
Not bad,
Okay.
Then I'm running up Alpe d'Huez, and I blow again, and then this guy that was 11 minutes behind me is hitting me in the back and saying, come on, Rochi.
So Sean has caught you up.
He caught me, and he finished like 20 minutes ahead of me.
Oh my!
You
So
know,
you blew big time, mate. You
maybe not 20 minutes, but like 10 minutes ahead of me. So I lost like
yeah
10 minutes on that, 20 minutes nearly on that climb. But but then it's a learning curve as well, and you learn to dig deeper, and you learn to get to know yourself, what you can do, what you can't do, and what you're capable of. And I always feel that you have to go right to the very bottom and sub-zero to be able to benefit from it. And there's no harm or shame or anything in going sub-zero.
yeah
It's a part of the learning curve, and you learn more from this than actually winning sometimes, and you learn how deep you can really go,
yeah
which that probably helped me going on in future years, to know that I can actually go very, very deep and still survive.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, that's a real. I mean, that story is one that you could apply to any kind of walk of life, couldn't you? Really, it's about understanding that the highs and the lows, and it's the lows that help make you who you are, Stephen, isn't it? Really, that's really, really important thing. And another question I want to ask you is more of a bit of a fun one, really. If ASO gave you a call, say it's Mr. Prudhomme on the phone, he said, Stephen, we want you to design a stage of the tour next year. What would the stage be? Where would it go? So if you had like, okay, it's going to be the Stephen Roche Legend stage. What part of France would it be? Where would it finish? What would it look like? What would it be like?
Well, I'm always fascinated by the stage that's favorite stage to La Plagne.
Yes.
As there was like 4 or 5,000 meters of climbing. Like went over Galibier, Telegraph, Madeleine. It was just an amazing stage, and like the survival of the strongest. Really, you might say it might have been too hard, but nevertheless, it was an amazing stage. But then I think on the Tour de France, if it was my stage, for sentimental reasons, I'd have it finishing on La Plagne. But then you really have to kind of have the Tour de France mountain stage finishing in Alpe d'Huez. But my stage wouldn't finish in Alpe d'Huez because I never got over Alpe d'Huez very good.
Okay. Okay.
So I couldn't have a finishing on Alpe d'Huez. So but then there's different climbs. But I think the mountain stage is always the most attractive and the most it's a stage where you get the most kind of yes, I did it, So yeah, the stage of the Tour of '87 and La Plagne will be my stage to put back on the board again.
Great stuff. Well, we'll have a word with Mr. Prudhomme next time we bump into him. And finally, Stephen, I mean, we could talk for hours. We haven't unfortunately got the time. I mean, you've clearly got a photographic memory, but just in relation to anybody who's watching this, especially young riders who are thinking about embarking on a professional career, maybe dreaming about riding the Tour de France, what advice would you give them? A couple of little bits of advice.
Just like you said, Matt, keep dreaming.
Yeah.
And dream big. There's no point in, starting out on something without having dreams. And there's no harm in dreaming big. And I always say, if you share your dreams with people and they don't laugh at you, because you haven't dreamt big enough. So if you say something to your friends, I want to achieve this, and they laugh at you, then you can say, well, okay, it can be done, because it sounds ridiculous, and the more it sounds ridiculous, the more achievable it is. So like there's no nothing, everything is achievable once the homework is done, and of course everything is united to be able to achieve it. But I think I always say, whatever chance you have of achieving by dreaming about it, if you don't dream about it, you have no chance of achieving it. So, guys, dream big. And girls, of course, dream big.
Dream big. That's a lovely way to end it, Stephen. Thank you so much. Hopefully our paths will cross maybe at the Tour de France this year, if not at the launch, where I bumped into you very recently. But thanks for sharing some of your stories, some of your anecdotes, and maybe we'll do another one of these where we can dig a little bit deeper, because I'd love to listen to some more, mate. But for now, thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Cheers.